Okay, so we're down with session 11, now we're going to session 12. Now we finished do this, and what I ever said over there is this, right? I already explained all this, right? Now we're going on the slope of the LM. All you have to do is know is this, right? If B is large, right, you're going to have a flat LM. If your B is small, you're going to have a steeper LM. So what you need to take from this is this, right? If B is large, right, there's going to be a small change in interest rate, and a small change in Y, because you have a flat LM. Let's make sense of this. LM curve, that's a negative or positive sloping curve. Positive sloping LM. No, but first let's draw the IS curve, right? I'll tell you why just now. IS curve. Now let's do the LM. Now LM, they say it's very flat. So there we go. Your steep will be like more up. So if your LM change, because let's say they increase the money supply, the South African Reserve Bank, it's going to increase to that amount. But can you see how there's such a small difference over here? Like the Y increased by so little, and then interest increased by so little also. Can you see? But if you had a steeper LM curve, so let's just remove this and put a steeper element C. Right, so let's see how if our LM was steeper. Now if you increase the money supply, it's going to shift to the right again. But I want you to see that, can you see how big this difference is? Even the interest rate. Can you see how big difference there is in a change of Y? So will you agree with me, when a flatter LM curve will only produce small interest rate drop, small interest equilibrium Y's? Because as we've seen, if we now go back, the flatter LM will produce, okay, now it's not going to show me that, but you get the point, right? The LM is very flat. If you shift it, no, it's a little bit closer. Okay, I'm going too close, but see how small difference. So yeah, if the LM curve is flat, I think everything's small. But the ironic thing is, your B is large. That's the ironic thing is. Is that an H or a B? I'm sure that's a B. Yeah. Okay, now steeper, I already showed you. If your B is small, remember a small associated with big. So yeah, steeper, large change in the interest. Interest goes down quick. Large change in Y. I showed you that, right? So better good way to remember this, right? When you think of LM, always think of the LM curve. This is what you think. Think small equals big things. Wink, wink. Right? So so now we go on a transmission mechanism. The transmission mechanism, I covered it at the end of session 11. It's the same thing where I said that it was this graph. This was the transmission mechanism. So I finished cover that, right? But to again elaborate, please watch the video. But basically, the supply increased more than the demand. So people had a lot of money. So because they had a lot of money, they bought bonds. Because they bought bonds, price of bonds increased, and in turn interest rate went down because they have a negative relationship. Bond price goes up, interest must go down. So obviously there's going to be a change in interest, and obviously because of that we saw the aggregate demand curve shifts up, because interest rate, when it drops, it shifts up. So we saw a change in aggregate demand, and because aggregate demand changed, also change in the Y. I showed you this in my video before this session 11. So yeah, so it affects changes in real money stock affect the level of output, the economy, and the interest rate. a very interesting liquidity trap. Okay, to summarize what a liquidity trap is. So if I have my LM curve over here, and if I have my IS curve over here, okay, so basically what this says is this. If my LM curve is normal, right? If I get more supply of money, increased supply of money by the federal bank, central bank, it's going to increase. Interest rate comes down, and output increases, right? This is all good. What if we have a liquidity trap? If we have a liquidity trap, your LM curve is no longer this, it's vertical. So now your LM curve is vertical, and your IS curve obviously stays the same. So now I want you to think about this. No, wait, sorry. So horizontal, my bad. Let's get a vertical LM curve, right? Okay, now we got a vertical LM curve because we've got a liquidity trap. So now, increase supply of money by who? The central bank, South African Reserve Bank. Let's see what happens. I want to shift it to the right. What happened? You can't shift a flat curve to the right. So what do we conclude over here? When the economy is in a liquidity trap, we cannot use anything from the LM market, which is the money market, to help stimulate the economy. We can't, because we can't shift this graph. and one of the things over here is this. When we have a liquidity trap, it means your interest rate is like close to 0%. So if you really think about it, right? If your interest rate is 0%, and if you want to lower interest, you can't go below 0%. Like, there's no such thing as negatives. So because it's already at 0%, you can't go less than that. So you kind of like damn, like your economy is doomed. So they show you over here how when the interest rate is so down, the banks, you see here, banks, the way they stimulate the economy, right? Right now, in loans, right now, interest rate is about 7%, right? If right now the banks tonight, right now, they mention the interest rate now they're charging for loans is 2%, the demand for money is going to increase. We're going to go running to the banks to get money. So the economy is going to be stimulated, everything's going to be good. But now they can use this because your interest rate is something high, 7%, so they reduce it to 2%. But what if your interest rate is 0%? Can they put this even more down to encourage you to borrow more money or to spend more money in the economy? No. So you get what I'm trying to say. You're in a liquidity trap right here, because you cannot use interest rate to stimulate the economy. You cannot use your money markets. Like, you mad, right? Okay. So that's the big reason of this liquidity trap, right? Yeah, very hard to get out of. Only way you get out of is your interest rate goes up or back. Okay, so what's another reason? So we already discussed the first reason why monetary policy on the economy won't work. We said it could be a liquidity trap, number one, right? The second reason, banks are reluctant to lend money. If banks do not lend money to us because they scared we're not going to pay back, then all the people in the country or the economy is not going to get money out from the bank. So monetary policy is when the South African Reserve Bank like basically lowers the repo rate, or they buy bonds from our banks. So remember, the South African Reserve Bank, they don't come to us, they always come to the normal banks in our country, ABSA, FNB, or whatever. They sell them the bonds to put money in our economy. So the South African Reserve Bank over here, if they give all the money to our, let's say, ABSA, but ABSA doesn't put any money in the economy because they're scared we're not going to pay it back. So they don't put any money in the economy. Then that means monetary policy won't work. Because South African Reserve Bank, he cannot go from here and give us the money. No, he always has to go to the bank. Now normally South African Reserve Bank gives money to APSA in a form of bonds, whatever, and then APSA gives us loans or whatever. That's how it works, monetary policy. But sometimes these banks in a recession, they're very scared to lend out the money, so they keep the money that the African Reserve Bank gives them. So APSA will buy like bonds from them. Oh, sorry, so African Reserve Bank will buy bonds from them, because that means it's giving money to them. So all the banks in the economy is keeping the money for themselves. They're just letting it be there in a safe. If the money is kept in the safe, it's not going to be given to the people of the economy. People are not going to spend the money to one another. Buy, selling, buy, selling. It's not going to work. So because of this blockage, reluctant banks to lend, that's the second reason. They prefer to lend it to the government because it's safer, because they will pay it back. This ain't gonna work in South Africa. You would think already the government is in debt. Now they think it's safer. Yo, they are dreaming, man. They are dreaming. Anyway, not the point. Now, what if our LM curve is classical? Classical means vertical. So if our LM curve, right, is vertical, and if we increase the supply of money, so monetary policy is very effective. Why? Can you see when we increase the supply of money, that's obviously going to be the money market, so the LM moves. Can you see how it moves quite far? So it's very, very good if it's vertical. However, if this is the monetary policy, so obviously it's going to affect LM. But if fiscal is going to affect the goods market, and that's IS. If it's going to affect the IS market, so it increases, it doesn't do anything to the output. It only increases the interest rate, so that's bad. So your conclusion, in the classical case, you can only use monetary policy, because that's the only thing that increases Y. If you use fiscal policy when you have a classical LM, a vertical LM, your Y is not going to move. So you cannot use that. That's a conclusion. Yeah, basically that's it. And this equation basically says in the classical case, so obviously in the classical case, the amount of money will be equal to this. The money supply will equal to this. Let's see, in the classical case, yeah, it makes sense. Your LM is what? It's your money market. Where do you get the money market from? The supply and demand of money. We know the demand of supply of money is going to be a vertical slope, right? The demand of money is going to be like this. But now, because LM is vertical, this means both the supply and demand of money is vertical. So because of that, the demand is going to equal to the supply curve exactly, and it's going to be equal to, see, this is also P times Y is basically like the GDP, the nominal GDP, like. So the money supply over here and the demand is literally the same thing. They're both equal to each other. So whenever you get the LM curve completely vertical, you can assume the demand and supply of money is completely vertical. That basically means, like, they're completely the same. So yeah. And yeah, that's it. That's session 12.